All right. Good morning to everybody and everybody that will watch this later on YouTube. Today's lesson is Prophecies of Jesus in the Old Testament, and this is part six. And this will be kind of a response to the Jewish ideology of the Messiah. Because as we've been going through this series, we've been pointing to the evidence that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the one that was foretold of. And we look at his life and the way he died and his lineage and where he was born. And based on all that evidence, we can say we have the right person. Jesus is the Messiah. However, many people do not accept Jesus today, primarily people of the Jewish faith, of Judaism. They don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And they give a number of reasons why they don't. And so, what I want to do today is examine those reasons and see, do they have a point? Or are we actually correct? Or are they right? Should Jesus be rejected on this criteria that they say he doesn't fulfill? So I kind of want to just examine that and respond to that. You know, uh, are they right? In their response. So let's look at some of the points. This is not going to cover everything, all their arguments, but I think it will be sufficient to cover the main ones that they have against Jesus. So the first reason, from what I could examine, the reason that the Jews reject Jesus is because of his lineage. They're doubtful of Jesus actually being a descendant of David, and they also doubt. They say if the virgin birth was true, then that means that Jesus isn't the son of Joseph. In the family line, it goes through Joseph. In Jewish tradition, family lines are always recorded by, it's male dominated. It's mostly the male is the father, and then you track the family history through the male. And Jesus being born of a virgin means Joseph is not his biological father. Therefore, he cannot be the son of David, which is a requirement in order to be considered the Messiah. And this all kind of stems from their ideology that the Messiah is supposed to be a human. He's actually supposed to be a human. He's going to be a special human, but he's supposed to be human in nature. That's why they are very critical of the virgin birth, and they say we don't know Jesus's lineage. They kind of doubt his lineage, and they also point out the different family lines of Jesus because Matthew gives a family line, but then Luke is similar, but it diverges and gives some different names in there, and they're doubtful of Jesus's lineage. And then they said if he was from a virgin, that wouldn't make sense because the Messiah is supposed to be a human by natural means. So let's respond first to the family accusation that his family lineage is doubtful. Now I don't know why Matthew and Luke have different lines. We don't fully comprehend it. We have theories of why the lines they're the same for most of the portion, and then there's a point where they kind of diverge. If you ever read the different lines for the genealogy of Jesus, and there's a number of plausible explanations for that. Maybe one is of Joseph, one's of Mary, showing that Jesus, both his parents are from the line of David. One is the biological line, or another one is the legal line in terms of, if there was a Levirate marriage and somebody's considered their son because they performed the Levite marriage, or somebody's adopted, and it's just showing, he's from the line, even though there's some mixture going on for whatever. There's a lot of different reasons for why those lines may diverge. However, one thing I want to point out is that at the time of Jesus, his line is not really an issue. And the reason is when we look at the New Testament, when we look at the records of Jesus' interactions with people, they always refer to him as son of David. They recognize Jesus as somebody who is descendant from David. If that was an issue, they wouldn't have recorded that people were interacting with him uh, in that way. And you also got to remember, if the lines were completely made up, then it could have easily been verified at that time if Jesus was actually a descendant of David or not. But they don't have an issue with it. And this is not just in the biblical source, this is also in the Jewish sources themselves. If I can share my screen. Oops, sorry. Let me get my technical difficulty. All right, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Just give me a thumbs up if you see it.
Yes.
All right. When we go to the Jewish sources, to the Jewish Talmud, which is in the Talmud is a collection of Jewish rabbinical sayings, things that rabbis have commented on the scripture and things in history. And so it originally was oral, but then it was later written down. But in the Jewish Talmud, they actually say this about Jesus. And this is, to give you context, this is when Jesus, after they were saying that Jesus was going to be executed around the Passover Eve, which we looked at last week. It says in the Jewish Talmud, it says, Ula said, how can you understand this proof? Was Jesus the Nazarene worthy of conducting a search for a reason to acquit him? He was an insider to idol worship. The merciful one states with regard to an insider to idol worship. Neither shall you spare, neither shall you conceal him. Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 9. And this kind of goes back to they said Jesus was executed for idol worship because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, and they thought of that as idolatry, something against God, blasphemy. And this is the Jewish source on them. They don't look favorably towards Jesus, of course, but this is what they say. Now, what's interesting in this is this last part. It says, rather, Jesus was different as he had close ties with the government. The Gentile authorities were interested in his acquittal. Consequently, the court gave him every opportunity to clear himself so that it could not be claimed he was falsely convicted. So their account of Jesus, of course, like I said, kind of confirms, even though it's different and they're not favorable towards Jesus, they actually confirm some of the narrative of the Bible that Jesus was executed around Passover, and they're claiming he was because he was performing sorcery, but we know Jesus performed miracles, and that he was claiming idol worship because Jesus says, "I'm the Son of God," and we believe that to be true. But in their perspective, they're like, "No, he's promoting idol worship." But they also said he had close ties with the government. Now, when it says that, the term that I've also read, it could also be read as close ties to the kingdom, and it's not referring to a political position. This term, the way it's used in context, is actually referring to his lineage. They're saying he's somebody with close ties to royalty. And who is royalty? Of course, David was. David was a king, right? And the Jewish perspective at that time, they're saying Jesus had close ties with the kingdom or with the government. He was somebody of royal lineage. And they also put this as the reason why the Gentile authorities were very hesitant to try to execute him at first. And that kind of goes with the narrative of the New Testament, because if you read the New Testament, we know that Pilate was trying to he wasn't trying to execute Jesus. He says, I couldn't find no fault in him. And the Jewish sources say it was also because of his lineage, and they were very hesitant to even kill Jesus, and that's probably why Pilate was also asking, like he said, "Oh, so are you a king?" And that conversation. So that just the Bible doesn't tell us all that, but that could be another possible reason why Pilate was so hesitant to take out Jesus. But either way, the point I'm trying to make is that Jewish sources do recognize him as somebody very important, somebody of royal lineage. So if Jesus's background was an issue back then, they should have wrote that he was falsely claiming to be the son of David, but they don't write that. In fact, they kind of confirm that Jesus was somebody of royal bloodline. So I don't think, from the lineage standpoint, that there's really a lot of basis to deny that he was, in fact, the son of David, and at least regarded as the son of David at that time. Now let's go to the virgin birth issue because, like I said, the belief is that the Messiah was supposed to be a human descent. He was only supposed to be human, especially human, but he was supposed to be a human ruler, somebody that God chose of mankind. However, that's not completely consistent with the Bible either. If we go to Micah chapter 5, verse 2, it reads, "But you, Bethlehem," I don't know how to say that the last part, Bethlehem. I can't say the other title. "Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." So, in regards to Messiah, the Old Testament says that the Messiah, it says that you're going to give birth to one who will be the ruler of Israel, and it says his origins are from old ancient times. And we've talked about this before, that the Bible says the Messiah, his origins are going to be ancient. He is already in existence now. He hasn't been born yet. He hasn't come into the world, but he already exists. So the idea of him just being a normal person, or he will only come into existence when he's born on earth, the Bible doesn't say that. It says his origins are old, they're ancient. He's already in existence. And if we go to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, it reads, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. The government will be on his shoulders. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." So, if the Messiah was only supposed to be a human, why would he be called Wonderful Counselor? Why would he be called Mighty God? Why would he be called Everlasting Father? That would be blasphemy if a human called himself that, called himself Prince of Peace, called himself Everlasting Father. It's not blasphemy for Jesus because Jesus says the Father and I are one. So that's why it doesn't make sense that to think that um, the Messiah would only be just a human, because the Old Testament says no, his origins are ancient, and he would be called Mighty God, be called Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That's part of his nature. So that it doesn't really work to say that he would just be human. And then if we go to the New Testament, Jesus pretty much asked them, like, why are you going against me because I say these things? If you go to John chapter 10, verse 25 through 30, it reads, "Jesus answered, I did tell you, but you did not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. But you do not believe me because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one." So when Jesus says this is very consistent with the Old Testament because the Old Testament says his origins are ancient and he would have the nature of being mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So this idea of that that the Messiah was only supposed to be a human is not consistent with the Old Testament, not the way he's described. Now, as far as the virgin birth itself, if we go to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 13 through 14, Isaiah chapter 7, 13 through 14, it reads, Then Isaiah said, Hear now, you house of David, is it enough? Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. So the Old Testament says the sign would be a virgin would give birth. That would be a sign from God. And it says you also call him Emmanuel. This is not just a name in itself, but it's also part of the nature of the Messiah. It says a virgin will give birth, and you will recognize him as Emmanuel. And Emmanuel means God with us. So that's part of his nature, not just his name itself, because we know Jesus is not called, as far as we can tell, he's not called Emmanuel as just his normal name. His name is Jesus, but Emmanuel does refer to his nature. That's why he's called Emmanuel in the Old Testament. And so the Bible says this that will be a sign. A virgin will give birth, and he will be known as God being with us. And of course, what happens with Jesus? Jesus is born of a virgin, and Jesus says, The Father and I are one. I am a manifestation of God on earth. That's the way Jesus presented himself. So it doesn't make sense to disqualify the Messiah by the same sign God said, I'm going to send them by. That doesn't make sense, right? It's saying, God, the sign is a virgin will give birth, but then you disqualify him because he says, well, now because he's born a virgin, he can't be from the lineage of David. And so you're disqualifying the Messiah by the exact same sign. God says, I'm going to send the Messiah. That's a contradiction. That doesn't really work. Now, the way they counter this, and they know this that doesn't work, and the way they counter this is they talk about the translation of that verse. Because if you read Isaiah chapter 7, depending on what version you read, it says a version, version I'm reading, the NIV version, it says the virgin. Some translations of the Bible will say the young woman, or you may see it in your notes, depending on the Bible you're using, it'll say or a young woman. And the reason they point to that translation, because the original term in Hebrew is Alma, I believe, if I'm pronouncing that right, and it does mean young woman. And a lot of people that try to go against the virgin birth saying it's just saying a young woman. It's not saying a virgin will give birth, and therefore that opens the possibility of the Messiah being conceived by normal means like everybody else is. However, in this context, this would be a young woman who is a virgin. The reason for this, you have to take into account when they make this comparison to the Old Testament, especially like in Matthew, making the comparisons to Isaiah. The version of the Bible that's being read at this time very commonly is the Septuagint, or the Greek version of the Bible. And because remember, at this time, a lot of the Jewish people have been spread. They have been taken out of the promised land. Some are coming back, but they've been spread among different nations. And Hebrew is not their first language for a lot of them. Some of them, the most common language is actually Greek. That's the language that's understood. And the Old Testament have been translated into Greek, the Septuagint. They've been translated into Greek. Now, in the Greek version, the term that is used for this passage is specifically virgin. And that's important. The reason why is because, according to the tradition of the Jewish rabbis, is that the Greek version of the Bible was interpreted by Jewish elders. If you look at it, let me share my screen again. So going back to the Talmud, and it's in a different location. The Talmud, it's right up here. I don't know how to pronounce it, but if you look online, look under this section and go to 9a, paragraph 11, you'll find it. But it reads in the Talmud. It says the Gemara continues. This was due to the incident of King Ptolemy. And a side note, King Ptolemy is the king of Egypt, of the Greek dynasty of Egypt, because Alexander the Great conquered old Persia and all these areas. So there's a Greek dynasty in Persia. So, Greek in this area actually becomes the most common language because you have Greek dynasties ruling over these areas at this time, even though Egypt ethnically is something different. But continuing, as is taught in Baratia, there was an incident involving the king of Ptolemy of Egypt, who assembled 72 elders from the sages of Israel and put them into 72 separate rooms and did not reveal to them for what purpose he assembled them, so they would not coordinate their responses. He entered and approached each of them and every one of them and said to each of them, write for me a translation of the Torah of Moses, your teacher. The Holy One, blessed be he, placed wisdom in the heart of each and every one. And they all agreed to one common understanding. Not only did they all translate the text correctly, they all introduced the same changes into the translated text. So, in Jewish tradition, the King Ptolemy gathered people of Israel, the elders of Israel, and he wanted them to translate the Old Testament into his native language, into Koine Greek, into Greek, something that could be understood by him. And all these men were able to translate it, and they were consistent with their translation. And the Septuagint is a translation of what the Hebrew writers meant. It is an accurate translation of the Old Testament, and they specifically use the term virgin for this passage. There's other terms they could have used if it was more vague of young woman. They could have used, there's other Greek words they could have used, but they specifically use the term virgin in this text. So, and this is the Jewish sources saying this. So that means in their mind, they thought of this passage referring to a young woman who has not been married, a young woman who would presume to be a virgin. I don't know if they fully understood that the sign was going to be literal when Jesus is born. They may have thought it was symbolic, who knows? But when we say that Jesus was going to be born of a virgin and that matches Old Testament, that is an accurate translation. That is the accurate way to look at it because that's how they look at it. So, young woman in their context in this passage is referring to a virgin. So they can't use that to say we're mistranslating the text. No, the meaning is actually that. So, Jesus, the way he was born, is consistent with the prophecy. It is consistent with the Old Testament because the evidence is that that's what they meant, and so that's why we look at it that way. So the way Jesus being born of a virgin is consistent with the Old Testament, and you can't use God's sign against himself to disqualify the Messiah he's going to send because God said, I'm going to send him this way. Uh, you can't disqualify him based on what God said he's going to, in the manner God said he's going to send him. Now, that does still leave us the question of if Jesus was born of a virgin, why how is he still the son of David? And that could be a whole other discussion talking about Jesus' nature, about uh, his human nature, but also his spiritual nature. And we can go into that, but that's kind of out of the scope of the class. I don't want to go in that conversation. But the important thing to understand is that the sign is correct. Jesus being born of a virgin is consistent with the Old Testament, and we can't ignore Jesus, the Messiah, based on the fact that he comes in the way God said he literally would come. Now, For the other responses, some other reasons, I'm kind of going to tie them together. Uh, the Jewish ideology is that when the Messiah comes, there will be a gathering of the Jewish people. God's going to gather the Jewish people. There will be world peace, and there will be a rebuilding of the temple. If we go to Micah, I think Micah, there's plenty of other passages that talk about this, but I think Micah kind of sums up all those points together. Let's go there. Micah chapter 4, and we'll read verse 1 through 8. Micah chapter 4, verse 1 through 8. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established. As the highest of the mountains, it will be exalted above the hills, and peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. All the nations may walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever." Verse 6. In that day, declares the Lord, I will gather the lame. I will assemble the exiles, those I have brought to grief. I will make the lame my remnant, those driven away a strong nation. The Lord will rule over them in Mount Zion from that day and forever. As for you, watchtower of the flock stronghold, of daughter Zion, the former dominion will be restored to you. Kingship will come to daughter Jerusalem. So, like I said before, in the Jewish ideology, when we talk about the Messiah coming, one of the things Messiah was supposed to bring is he's supposed to bring the Jewish people who were put in exile, because we know that the Jews are made up of two tribes: the Benjamin, the modern Jewish people that stayed in the land. They were the tribe of Judah and also the tribe of Benjamin, I believe. And the other 10 tribes are kind of lost. They were deported out of the land of Israel, and they have been, since then mixed into other cultures. We can't even tell, their background anymore. But the idea for in the Jewish mindset is that God is supposed to bring all the Jewish exiles back into Jerusalem. There's going to be a time of peace. There will be a kingship, and this is very based on kind of human standards of an actual a kingship would arise, and people and everybody know who God is, and it's going to be a literal nation. That's the Jewish mindset, because remember, Jesus is supposed to be a human. The Messiah is supposed to be a human ruler in their mindset. And because that hasn't happened, because we obviously today we still have wars, we still have not everybody accepts God in their heart. There's still a lot of problems in this earth. They say because it hasn't come about, Jesus can't be the Messiah, because if the Messiah was here, he would bring about all those people together. He would bring all our people back, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. There'll be a banner for all the people. There'll be a rebuilding of the temple. Uh, and that would all happen. And because that hasn't happened yet, therefore Jesus can't be the Messiah. However, there's some factors we need to consider when we talk about that mindset of a physical kingdom being built like that. If we go to Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 through 6, and then we're going to skip down to 21 and 23. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 through 6. See, the Lord is going to lay waste the earth and devastate it. He will ruin its face and scatter its inhabitants. It will be the same for priests as for people, for the master as for his servant, for the mistress as for her servant, for seller as for buyer, for borrower as for lender, for debtor as creditor. The earth will be completely laid waste and totally plundered. The Lord has spoken this word. The earth dries up and withers. The world languishes and withers. The heavens languish with the earth. The earth is defiled by his people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse consumes the earth. Its people must bear their guilt. Therefore, earth's inhabitants are burned up, and very few are left. And then we go down to 21, verse 23. In that day, and this is coming to the day of the Lord, when the Messiah comes. In that day, the Lord will punish the powers in the heavens above the kings on the earth below. They'll be herded together like prisoners bound in a dungeon. They'll be shut up in prison and will be punished after many days. The moon will be dismayed, the sun ashamed, for the Lord Almighty will reign on Mount Zion and Jerusalem and before its elders with great glory. So when you read Isaiah and you read the Old Testament, the idea of the earth is that the earth would not always last forever. You know, the earth is defiled by us because we have broken the covenant. The earth withers and goes away. You know, the earth is constantly changing, it's constantly decay. We go to Isaiah chapter 51, verse 6. It also reads, lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants die like flies. But my salvation will last forever, and my righteousness will never fail. So when we talk about the promise of the day of the Lord, when we talk about the Messiah coming, we know that God's kingdom is supposed to last forever. However, the earth, this physical realm, in and of itself, is not meant to last forever. You know, in our current form, we're going to what? We're going to die eventually. We're going to die. We're going to pass on. The earth, you know, can be damaged. The earth will wither. It'll be worn out eventually. But God's kingdom is supposed to last forever. So if it was simply, if God was trying to establish something that was similar to a human kingdom or a nation that's just on the earth and just a physical existence, it wouldn't last. But God's kingdom is supposed to last. So how does God create a kingdom that lasts forever? But you know, how does He create that? It can't be done just in the physical realm. It can be done in the spiritual realm. That's why in John chapter 18, verse 36, it reads, Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So when you talk about Jesus and what he brought, no, he did not bring a physical kingdom or a kingdom of peace physically on the earth. He does not bring that, or at least he hasn't brought it yet, unless he brings it with a second coming. But ultimately, in order for us to last forever, in order to have that type of place, that type of kingdom that lasts forever, it can't be limited to this physical space. It has to be something more. It has to be something spiritual. Because remember, God is a spirit, right? So God doesn't just exist in the physical realm. He is essentially in the spiritual realm. And if it's going to last forever, it needs to be a kingdom that is in the spiritual realm. So when Jesus comes to say, you know, the kingdom has hand, when Jesus comes and he doesn't bother to be a king, he doesn't want to be a king by human standards. He wants to create a kingdom that is past this earthly dwelling. That makes sense. Because that means that's how the kingdom will last forever. Because here on earth, we're very inconsistent. We've defiled the earth. There's free will. People will choose. Some people will choose to follow God, and some people won't. And people do bad things. So we'll never have a full blown. At least I don't think we'll ever have a full blown peaceful, completely peaceful existence here on earth. But when we go to God in spirit, when we shed this physical form, then we can be a part of a kingdom that will last forever. That's when we can exist forever because our souls are meant to be immortal. Our physical bodies are meant to decay. But our spirit never decays. It's something that's always in existence. So I believe that is more consistent. Jesus bringing a kingdom that's not physical. I think that's way more consistent than their ideology of this is supposed to be a human kingdom or Jesus is only supposed to be human. What Jesus brings is very consistent to what God said was going to happen. And this also makes sense for how God is going to bring the exiles from because it says, I'm going to bring my people back from exile. But we know about the 10 tribes, they are mixed in with a lot of different, ethnically, they're mixed in with a lot of different people. The tribes don't exist anymore. They're lost tribes. They have been mixed and changed, and there's no really, those other tribes, they don't exist anymore. But if God is connecting them by His word, by people who choose to follow Him, that's why the New Testament explains. I didn't write down the verse. The New Testament explains, if you follow God's commandments, you are now Abraham's seed. If God is bringing back the people who were in His presence, the 10 tribes of Israel, and He's bringing them back by spiritual means, that's the perfect way to bring back the exiles because it's not going to matter your blood or your ethnicity. Is going to matter is, do you follow God or not? So a spiritual kingdom lasts forever, and that makes way more sense than the idea that it's supposed to only be a human kingdom. And so I think the ideology itself is not consistent with what God wants to do because that kingdom needs to be lasting forever. And human, by earth standards, we can't create a kingdom that lasts forever. We can't in our existence in this way. Um, I saw some chats. Let me look at it. Paul put, this is so powerful how God used men to accurately translate his word. It's certainly not an accident that those 72 men made the same translation. This lesson reaches deep into the present Israel, who were recently attacked by Hamas. As a nation, they are rejecting God's will by rejecting Christ. This connection will present the day Israel, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Israel writers is awesome. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yep. So that's pretty much. Oh yeah, I'm out of time. I need to get ready to go to Bible class. But I think it's very important to understand that when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at what Jesus does, if you take the right mindset into it and you look at it the right way, Jesus makes sense. He makes so much sense. The way he's born, what he brings, creating a spiritual kingdom instead of a physical kingdom. God using the family of David to bring about the Savior because it shows the family lines of both. Some believe it's showing of both Joseph and Mary, or maybe Joseph from a biological standpoint, and then another line from it from a legal standpoint. To me, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that Jesus is the Messiah, and I don't think this rejection of him are by standards thought of by human ideology and is not consistent with the way God sees things. And we got to be careful of it because sometimes we create different standards or different ways of doing stuff. And we're saying, I'm going to disqualify you because this doesn't fit my standard. But God's ways are different from ours. All we have to do is look for the signs and look for evidence to say, is this person sent by God? And we have to follow and listen to him. And that's what Moses was telling the people back in the day. If you read back, I forgot exactly, I think it's Deuteronomy. Moses tells the people, he says, God's going to raise a prophet from among your brethren like me, and you must listen to him. And I think sometimes we don't listen to the word and we just kind of interpret it how we want, and we got to be careful of that. because you'll reject the person God sent, uh, who He sent by His signal, by His sign. So, but that's all I had. Is there any questions or any comments before we close? All right. Well, we will stop it there.